Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, are we in our quorum call?
We are not.
Mr. President, on Saturday, the nation learned the name of Alex Preddy. Alex was an ICU nurse at the Veterans Administration, fulfilling our nation's sacred promise to care for our wounded warriors. Many have probably seen the video of him paying final respects and honors to one of our fallen veterans. Alex was also a neighbor who cared deeply about his community. And because of those values, Alex was an observer, recording and bearing witness to the actions of ICE and Customs and Border Patrol as they descended upon his hometown, stopping and detaining individuals without judicial warrants. We all saw video of Alex's final moments when he stopped to help a fellow observer, a woman who had been pushed by federal agents before those agents sprayed him with chemicals, disarmed him of the gun he legally carried, and shot him in the back, firing 10 shots in less than 5 seconds. We all saw this on video. In fact, multiple videos from multiple angles from other civilians on the street that day bearing witness. But this administration, the Trump administration, immediately lied to us. And when I say us, I mean the American people. They called Alex a domestic terrorist. They called him a would-be assassin. Mr. President, this administration must think the American people are really stupid, telling them not to believe their own eyes. This was the killing of an American citizen exercising his constitutional rights, and you would think that that by itself would spur a reckoning with the actions of the Department of Homeland Security. But this isn't one isolated event. This isn't even the only killing committed by DHS agents in Minnesota this year. On January 7th, a Minneapolis mom, Renee Good, was shot and killed as she attempted to drive away from immigration agents who aggressively approached her, contrary to DHS's use of force policy, and ultimately killed her and then prevented her from receiving immediate medical assistance. They lied about her case as well, accusing her also of domestic terrorism, despite the evidence that people across this land could see with their own eyes. Mr. President, this is not a case of just a few untrained bad apples. It is the result of an out-of-control federal agency that has directed its agents to act with impunity, to detain and deport scores of people who pose no risk to our communities in so many cases and have no criminal records, including small business owners, pastors, parents taking their kids to school, neighbors walking their dogs, children. This is an intentional policy coming out of the White House, from Donald Trump to Stephen Miller to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. J.D. Vance, the Vice President, said the agent who shot Renee Good was protected by absolute immunity. That's what the Vice President of the United States said. He should know better. And they have deliberately cut funding for offices at DHS that monitor the conduct of immigration officers to protect civil rights and civil liberties. They are giving agents a license to kill with impunity. Secretary Noem should be fired immediately. If not fired, impeached. Stephen Miller has now tried to point the finger at others when he has been the ringleader in the White House. He should be fired. DHS operates at the direction of the White House, of the President, with orders to meet arbitrary quotas, to detain and deport, not just the worst of the worst, but anybody. They conduct masked raids in unmarked vehicles and refuse to show identification. They arrest people without warrants, use force to enter homes, and lock people up without due process. They sweep up citizens, legal immigrants, and immigrants without deportation orders. And when they're confronted with their abuses, they lie. They tell us not to believe what we see with our own eyes. Mr. President, I want to salute the people in Minneapolis and across the country, including in Maryland, who are taking videos and working to hold these federal forces accountable. Think about what would have happened if there was no video in these cases. These videos have complicated the Trump administration's effort at a cover-up, even as the Trump administration refuses to work with state and local law enforcement to investigate these killings. In my state of Maryland, DHS lied about the circumstances surrounding a non-fatal shooting, and they were exposed in their lies because of a local county investigation that showed that DHS was plain wrong. DHS has restricted access to detention centers, preventing congressional oversight into inhumane conditions where we know at least 30 people have died in custody, including one death in Texas that has been ruled a homicide. And as they view the actions of peaceful protesters and observers as a personal offense, they've reacted with violence and labeled them domestic terrorists for practicing their constitutional freedoms and rights. In Minnesota, these federal agents hurl chemical irritants at peaceful crowds who are simply exercising their First Amendment rights to freedom of assembly and peaceful protest. They view whistles as weapons. In Portland, they claim to be threatened by people wearing frog costumes. My colleagues, Republicans in Congress, have fueled this surge in illegal activity by exploding the DHS budget with $165 billion as part of what Donald Trump called the big, beautiful bill. Remember, that's the bill where the richest people in the country were given permanent tax cuts. That's the bill that made deep cuts in health care for tens of millions of Americans. And in that bill was also this huge slush fund for DHS. ICE by itself is now the nation's highest funded law enforcement agency and has more funding than the militaries of most countries in the world, including Italy, Israel, and Brazil. ICE by itself has more funds than the armies for those countries. And now they're spending those funds to hire more agents and putting more of them out on the streets with limited training. They're preparing to turn warehouses into so-called processing sites and detention centers, including one in my home state of Maryland, doing it against the will of the community. We see DHS spitting in the face of local communities across the country. In Maryland, we had a rally with hundreds of people on a very cold day, sending a message to ICE and to the Trump administration that the people in that community did not want a warehouse for detainees right there. Within days of that demonstration, the Trump administration, ICE, signed a deal where they purchased for $100 million of our taxpayer money to purchase a warehouse where they say they can keep up to 1,500 detainees. I can tell you Maryland taxpayers don't want their monies going to that purpose, and I'll bet you the great majority of taxpayers around this country don't want to see their tax dollars used in that way as well. And now, despite the fact that they're already clearly misusing these taxpayer dollars as American citizens are killed on the streets, our fellow Republicans, our Republicans in the Senate, want to give them even more in the bill that would be up on this floor this week. In fact, another $10 billion more for ICE and over $18 billion more for Customs and Border Patrol, while refusing to rein in these abuses. Another blank check for lawless activity, another blank check that results in the killing of Americans, another blank check with no accountability. That would be madness. We cannot greenlight the actions of an agency that is already terrorizing our communities and executing our neighbors with billions of dollars in new funds without any regard to their constitutional rights. Again, President Trump said he was going to go after the worst of the worst. That has not been their focus, and we can see it with our own eyes. And we cannot accept the administration's claim that these agents have some kind of absolute immunity and are free from the consequences of their action. That's why an independent investigation into the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy has to happen. And I appreciate my colleagues from the other side of the aisle who have called for one. But that should be a standard situation. That should be the standard operating procedure in a situation like this. State and local law enforcement should, of course, be partners in that effort. The Fed should not be trying to hide evidence from those local and state law enforcement officers. We must do that, but it's not enough to take the word of the Trump administration that they will do that. We can't simply trust an administration that has repeatedly lied to the American people, as if this time they will try to do better. And again, we wouldn't be here probably but for that video. The administration would have thought that it got away with its lies. So let's not be naive. We're not going to give away our responsibility as legislators to put real reforms right into the DHS bill to prevent this lawlessness, to prevent these killings, to protect our freedoms, and to assure real accountability. Our most important job is protecting the life and liberty of the American people. It's sadly too late to protect Alex Preddy and too late to protect Renee Good, as they should have been protected. But it's not too late to act on behalf of the rest of the American people. So this week, we have before us a package of appropriation bills that includes the work of 6 appropriations subcommittees, including defense, transportation, housing, labor, health and human services, foreign operations, and financial services. These are not perfect bills, and I have serious concerns with some of them that I would like to see addressed. But it's also clear that there's enough support in this body to pass them. We could pass them today if they were separated out. In fact, when those bills went through the House of Representatives, they considered the Department of Homeland Security bill on its own merits. They didn't bundle it in with everything else and say, you know, you gotta vote for this whole package at one time. So the House, after they passed it individually, they pulled all those bills together and sent them in a bundle over here to the United States Senate. But my goodness, that doesn't mean the United States Senate has to take it that way from the House. This is supposed to be an independent branch of the Congress. I don't know why we would surrender our responsibilities to the House of Representatives, and they should get right back into Washington if we change this bill and pass it to prevent a shutdown of those agencies. That's their responsibility. Mr. President, the House needs to perform its duties, and we need to perform ours. And ours involve making sure that we separate out those 5 appropriation bills that I mentioned from the Homeland Security appropriations bills. In fact, I would argue that we should also take, as part of the package of 5 bills, we should take FEMA and TSA and the Coast Guard, which are part of the DHS bill. And we could send all of those back to the House for immediate passage to go on to the president. But instead, Republican colleagues here are wasting time. We could take up that package today if there was the will to do it among my Republican colleagues. But right now, instead, we're holding all of those other agencies, the Defense Department, Health and Human Services, hostage to holding on to the Department of Homeland Security bill that needs to be changed dramatically. I don't think that a single person in this body would argue against deporting those who have committed serious crimes, the worst of the worst. But that is not what this administration has been focused on. Nothing about this has been targeted. And Trump's ICE is not focused, as they promised, on the worst of the worst. They're stopping and arresting people who are citizens, who are legal residents, who have legal pending asylum claims, just because of how they look or their accent. And they're wreaking havoc on communities across the country, including on peaceful protesters, two whom have now given their lives to protect our freedoms. And you know what? They're not just using their own agents as part of this indiscriminate dragnet. They're bringing in other agencies as well, distracting them and redirecting them from critical missions. Senator Warner released data that showed that nearly half of the FBI agents in its largest field offices have been redirected to immigration away from fighting drug trafficking, terrorism, and violent crime. Mr. President, it's time for us in the Senate to do our job. This isn't going to go away with the couple hours of extra training, personnel reassignments, or administration statements. Let's make this a moment for real change and not give DHS another huge blank check. I, for one, will not vote for one more dime for this lawless DHS operation that we're witnessing at this time. And I yield the floor.
The senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are at an inflection point in this country, and what happens over the next few months will ring onward far into the future. We've all seen the scenes in Minneapolis, the riots, the violence, the bitter chaos. We've seen the headlines, the TV monologues, the nightly news reports, and the pundits' spin. If you weren't paying close attention, it might seem like all of this noise just exploded out of nowhere a month or two ago. But the story of what's happening in Minneapolis didn't begin last month. It didn't even begin last year when President Trump took office. It began on January 20th, 2021, the day Joe Biden became president. The Biden administration did something that has no precedent in American history. They intentionally opened our border to a full-scale invasion and actively sought to block any and every attempt to fight back. Millions upon millions of illegal aliens entered our country illegally, flooding in from some of the most violent places on earth, in direct violation of constitutionally enacted immigration laws passed by multiple Congresses and signed by presidents of both parties. It was the most egregious betrayal of federal law in American history. Trump ran and won on fixing this. It wasn't some minor footnote in his platform. It was one of the most fundamental, defining policies of his 2024 campaign. If you went out on the street and grabbed 10 Americans at random in November of 2024 and asked them what Donald Trump was running on, just about every single one of them will give you the same exact answer: the economy and illegal immigration. And here's the thing. He won. Donald Trump won. And let me repeat that for my Democrat colleagues. He won. He won the Electoral College. He won the popular vote. He swept all the battleground states, running on the promise to end the invasion and send illegal immigrants back home. The promise was one of the key reasons the American people sent him back to the White House. That was democracy in action. You know, we hear a lot of talk from the other side about democracy. Well, if democracy means anything at all, it means that this administration must be allowed to carry out the agenda the American people voted for. Enforcing our immigration laws, securing the border, and deporting immigrants who are here illegally. This is not a new concept, by the way. Democrat presidents for the last 20 years have done this. But the other side never had any intention of letting this happen. President Trump moved forward with his agenda. They were never going to let us enforce our immigration laws against those who had broken them. Why is that? Well, because mass migration is not just one policy preference among many for today's Democrat Party. It is the policy priority, the fundamental organizing principle of their entire agenda. It is the foundation of their platform and the final end of their worldview. Not one single Democrat has called on leftists in the streets to stop impeding law enforcement with their cars or to stop physically attacking law enforcement. Not a single one. They have zero interest in lowering the temperature. At this point, it's so obvious it almost feels silly to say. In Minnesota and here in D.C., Democrats are actively and intentionally adding fuel to the fire. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, has claimed his city is invaded, under siege, occupied. The lieutenant governor of Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan, declared that our neighbors are being disappeared. It's just called kidnapping, and publicly called upon Americans to put your body on the line and not go silently into the night. The governor, Tim Walz, compared the ICE presence in Minnesota to a Nazi occupation and likened residents of Minneapolis to Anne Frank. On Monday, Walz published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal declaring that the Trump administration's assault on Minnesota is a campaign of organized brutality against the people of our state. Just last week, he stood behind the metal gates of the governor's mansion with a bullhorn and told the crowd of protesters outside to go and cause trouble. These aren't unique examples. They are par for the course. Over the last month, we've heard similar things from just about every powerful Democrat in this country. I don't know what's in each and every one of their hearts. I don't know that. I don't know if they really believe that we're at war, or that ICE is the Gestapo, or that Minneapolis is under Nazi occupation. But whether or not they believe it, many of the people who hear them and listening to them do. And now, many of those people are taking these ideas to their final logical conclusion. And that's exactly what the people in power on the left actually want. They want the confrontations. They want the chaos. They want their conscious political strategy. That's what this is. Their conscious political strategy. They have decided that leaning in and ratcheting this up as far as it can go serves their political and ideological interests. So they're all in. And by the way, might I just point out, they're about ready to shut the government down again. They shut it down the first time because they wanted health care for illegal immigrants. Now they're willing to shut the government down, including FEMA funding and TSA funding, because they want to stop deportations of illegal immigrants. It is the single organizing principle of their party right now. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with this. Think about what it says about the kinds of people we're dealing with at this point. In a better era of American politics, we used to say things like, we all want what is best for the country. We just have different ideas about how to get there. When you hear statements like the ones that I just rattled off, it seems harder and harder to believe that right now. The radicals are people who fundamentally do not believe America deserves to be a sovereign nation, a nation that gets to decide who comes here and for how long and when you have to leave. These radicals have opposed the efforts in Minnesota and across the country to take criminals off of our streets. Criminals like Khu Lo Vang, a criminal illegal alien from Laos convicted of first-degree murder. Phuc Trong Nguyen, a criminal illegal alien from Vietnam convicted of possession of a weapon and rape. Pedro Ornelas, a criminal illegal alien from Mexico convicted of sexual assault and rape. Abdi Gel De Mohammed, a criminal illegal alien from Somalia convicted of sexual abuse of a minor. That's just a small sample of the last few weeks of arrests in Minnesota. These radicals are people who will cynically wax poetic about democracy in one breath and then deploy organized mob violence as a weapon to undermine the express will of the people when democracy doesn't go their way. My colleagues on the left are currently threatening to shut down our government, shut down the Department of Homeland Security if they don't get their way. What is their way?
Question.
No. What is their way? They demand we defund law enforcement agencies like ICE and CBP. They demand we force ICE agents to dox themselves so that their families can be harassed and threatened in their homes. They demand that we cripple federal law enforcement's ability to enforce our immigration laws. This is not about oversight. It's about paralysis. And the objective is mass amnesty, rewarding those who broke the law and punishing the men and women sworn to enforce it. My colleagues on the left are smart enough to know about the trail of American victims that mass immigration has left in its wake. But they've made a conscious decision to sneer and roll their eyes and pretend like it's all just the hysterical right-wing fantasy to advance their agenda. What's really going on here? Well, it's a desperate and intentional thirst for power at all costs, padding their numbers by importing new voters and illegally adding people to the census rolls to distort congressional apportionment and the Electoral College, even if Americans are less safe and it destroys our way of life in the process. I want my Republican colleagues in particular to hear me on this. Nobody wants to see American citizens being shot and killed. On a basic human level, it is a tragedy. Every time a life is lost, it is a tragedy. The lives lost in Minnesota have been tragic. But what we are seeing in the streets of Minnesota, it's not on ICE, it's not on the Border Patrol, and it's certainly not on President Trump. If it were, we would be seeing the same chaos in every city where ICE and Border Patrol carries out these operations. But we aren't. There have been large-scale deportation operations in red states all across the country. Most Americans probably never heard of them because they went off without a hitch. In fact, when we measure ICE arrests in each state last year against the state's share of the national illegal alien population, 21 out of the top 25 states are red. Only 3 blue states plus Washington, D.C. cracked the top 26. And one of those states was Virginia, which had a Republican governor who was willing to work with ICE at the time. A recent analysis found that just 9 counties account for nearly 2/3 of all violent confrontations with ICE in America over the past year. The number of violent confrontations in those counties was twice as high as the total instances of anti-ICE violence from the remaining 3,134 counties combined. Anti-ICE violence was 590 times more likely to occur in those 9 counties than in any other county in America. All 9 counties are deep blue sanctuary jurisdictions run by Democrats. We hear the left tell us that ICE and Border Patrol are agents of chaos and terror. The data tells a very different story. It's not ICE or Border Patrol that is causing this terror. It's the militant leftists and their enablers in the Democrat Party. And yet, in the face of all of it, the agents of ICE and Border Patrol continue to do their job, courageously carrying out their duty and running towards the fire. They are not villains. They are American heroes. They're on the front lines of the fight to save our country, and we owe them absolute, unequivocal, unflinching support. I want to close by reading a message from a DHS agent on the ground in Minneapolis that was shared earlier this month. Here's what he wrote. It is about -20 in Minneapolis right now, -31 with wind chill. I was leaving the building we're all holed up in. I think we've stacked close to 2,000 people in a building designed for 500. I ran into a grunt officer who's been sent here from Miami. He clearly had just got back from an operation. Dude looked absolutely exhausted. We talk a little smack about how bad the weather sucks, how tired everyone is from the operation tempo. We get outside. I ask him point blank how he feels about risking his life going against Arctic temperatures, criminals, and rioters. He stops, looks at me, and says, "Doesn't matter. We do the job." Then he walks off and jumps in a car to get on another target. No less than 10 seconds later, one of the garage doors where teams are staging at opens, and about 15 to 20 guys roll out in full kit and hop in cars from a different target set. Guys are risking it all in -40 temperatures to grab foreign invaders getting attacked by the very same countrymen they're trying to protect, with the entire city mobilized against them. They don't even think of stopping for 1 second. They don't eat, they barely sleep, they survive on nicotine and black coffee and the occasional MRE. Not one of the dozens, if not hundreds of men I've talked to even thinks about quitting. Everyone, senior leadership, is out there right now. The equivalent of general officers are out there on the ground making arrests and fighting through protesters alongside their guys. I've never seen commitment like this before. These men are genuine heroes. They're putting it all on the line every day, every second of the day. They know that the political winds can shift and that all the work and sacrifices and danger could be for nothing. They even know they'll probably face serious retribution for doing the right thing, but they don't care. They're still getting after it. Please keep these men and women in your prayers. They're a force of 20,000 going up against 20 million. Mr. President, that is courage. That is heroism. It is a heroism that the cowards hiding behind their guarded mansion gates will never understand. The ICE and Border Patrol agents are risking death every day. But the small men who sneer and bark at them from the sidelines are not men of virtue, but men who defy our rule of law. The deportations must continue. Sanctuary cities must end. The era of fake deals is over. There will be no fake, quote-unquote, comprehensive immigration reform, because a nation does not need new laws to enforce the ones it already has. President Trump demonstrated a basic truth of self-government. Law without enforcement is not law at all. Congress criminalized illegal entry. The executive branch is obligated to enforce it. And that is exactly what will happen. The systematic removal of those who violated federal law by entering this country illegally. No theatrics, no apologies, no amnesty, just enforcement. So, protest all you want, but let law enforcement do their jobs, enforcing the immigration laws that Republicans and Democrats passed. And let our men and women in law enforcement get home safe to their families. The only way out is through. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I asked my colleague from across the aisle if he'd pause for a question. not to address all of the list of particulars he threw at all 47 of his colleagues on this side of the aisle, but to simply make one point. And that is, he said, Democrats want to shut down the government. Did he forget that Republicans are in charge of this chamber? Did he forget that all 47 of us here said we're willing to vote today on the 5 spending bills? Did he miss that somehow? Republicans in charge of the Oval Office? In charge of the House of Representatives? In charge of the Senate? Yes, when I complete my remarks, I'll be happy to address the question. In charge of the Senate, and that we're ready to vote now on those 5 bills. So if there's a shutdown, it's clear where it's coming from. It's coming from the Republican leadership, the President of the United States of America. I've been profoundly disturbed by what I've seen with the way that the agents from the Customs and Border Protection and ICE have acted across this country. I held 17 town halls, very conservative Republican counties, super red counties, blue counties, purple counties, and people came out from across my state to say they are shocked, that they are disturbed by what they are seeing happening across our entire nation. They came to my town halls to say one simple thing: no more must this conduct occur. And I've come to the floor now to say no more. No more rogue patrols of federal agents accosting people based on the color of their skin or their accent. No more intrusions and violations into sensitive places like churches and mosques, synagogues, schools, daycare centers, hospitals, courthouses, and polling places. No more secret police tactics in which agents hide their personal identity, hide their agency identity, cover their face, use unmarked vans so people don't even know if they're being confronted by someone who has legitimate authority. No more federal agents arresting people and, in fact, knocking down doors without warrants. Could I remind my colleagues that there is a Constitution of the United States of America, and it says you cannot knock down doors without a warrant? It's shocking to see a memo from this president saying the executive branch can tell other parts of the executive branch they can violate the Fourth Amendment, knock down doors, violating a fundamental premise of the privacy and security and freedom of the people of the United States of America. No more blatant lies from Kristi Noem when citizen victims have been assaulted. She's quick to immediately say they're terrorists or they're would-be assassins when she has absolutely no evidence to support that. And immediately you know there'll be nothing close to an independent or fair investigation. Immediately you know she's making it up because she hasn't collected the information. And then the videos come out and they show that she lied to the American people. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but time and time and time again. The American people have witnessed the truth with their own eyes, thanks to the citizens who were responsibly videotaping the interactions. No more corrupt federal investigations that blame ordinary citizens for ICE thuggery. No more blocking members of Congress from touring immigration facilities or stonewalling congressional oversight. No more abducting children off the street, including a 5-year-old, the hat with little puppy ears on it. No more terrorizing of our community. No more execution of our citizens like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Colleagues, ICE has failed to follow the law. They have failed to honor the Constitution. They have destroyed their own legitimacy and integrity. Democrats have said, we're ready to vote on all 5 of the spending bills that do not involve ICE. Do it right now. Republican leadership says, hell no, we want to shut down the government. Wow. And then they want to blame Democrats. Let's have an honest conversation about who is responsible if there is a government shutdown. And that lies across the aisle to the right. The DHS bill must be separated because these issues must be debated and addressed. If the goal of my Republican colleagues is to avoid a debate over the misconduct of Customs and Border Protection and ICE, then they are not fulfilling their responsibility as representatives of the citizens of the United States of America who value their freedom, who value their privacy, never want to see the federal government knocking down their doors without a warrant. Kristi Noem has so failed in her honesty with America, she must go. As the Senate eventually considers the Department of Homeland Security bill, they must enact serious, meaningful reforms, including ending the roving patrols with all the violations they've been involved in, unmasking the secret police, ensuring accountability and fair investigations. And let me remind you that in Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, you remember the one? That was the bill that cut nutrition, cut health care, making it far more expensive for mega millions of Americans in order to give $75 billion to ICE, kind of advance funding it for like 5 years into the future. And they want additional money for ICE now with no debate on the floor of the Senate? They want to suppress a legitimate conversation about defending the privacy and rights of all Americans? About defending our Constitution? No, absolutely not. So every senator, recognizing they already have, ICE that is, has mega millions in their pocket, actually billions, 75 billion, not one more dollar for the ICE thuggery. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Smith and my colleagues for being here today to stand up for the state of Minnesota, for our nation, and for our Constitution. In the last year, we have too often come to the floor to discuss tragedies in our state. This summer, an assassin killed our friend Melissa Hortman, the former Speaker of the Minnesota House, and her husband, Mark. And we were once again shaken to our core when a mass shooter attacked Annunciation Catholic Church right in the middle of Mass. Children in their first week of school, 2 children murdered, 21 more people injured, including 18 kids. In recent weeks, Minnesota has once again been at the center of America's heartbreak. But we are also at the center of America's courage and hope. We honor Renee Good today. Renee Good, who left behind 3 children, including a 6-year-old, when she was shot and killed by an ICE agent. Her wife said this: kindness radiated out of her. She literally sparkled, and asked everyone to honor her memory by living her values, rejecting hate and choosing compassion. We also honor the memory of Alex Preddy, a VA intensive care nurse who did one of the most selfless jobs people could think of, caring for our veterans, often in their final hours, a man described by his friends and family as a kind-hearted soul. Both Renee and Alex should be alive today. Mr. President, it is not just these horrific killings. The administration, through their surge of thousands of ICE and Border Patrol agents to Minnesota, outnumbering the 10 largest metropolitan police departments combined in the Twin Cities, outnumbering the sworn officers in the Minneapolis-St. Paul departments by 3 to 1, has repeatedly violated the constitutional rights of the people of Minnesota. The fact is that anyone who cares about federalism, about freedoms, about liberties, should be horrified by what is happening. If you care about the Constitution, I say to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, you should be horrified, because what is happening in our state has been a violation of the First Amendment, the right to assemble. The Second Amendment, Alex was a lawful gun owner, but he was immediately criticized for that when in fact the video showed very clearly, because eyes don't lie, that his gun was firmly in its holster and it was taken out by Border Control agents. They've been violating the Fourth Amendment, ramming into people's homes without a judicial warrant. Agents have been demanding, without even reasonable suspicion, that Minnesotans show proof of citizenship, just based on how they look. And this administration is going after the Fifth Amendment, the right to due process. It has denied detainees access to counsel. And as the chief judge in the District of Minnesota, a former clerk to Justice Scalia, and a George Bush appointee has made clear, they have been defying court orders. And I say to our Republican colleagues, if you are a defender of liberty, you must defend it when it counts, not just when it's convenient. Federal immigration agents bashed upon a door and detained a Hmong elder, a U.S. citizen whose mom was one of the most loved nurses that took care of our troops during the Vietnam War. They held him at gunpoint without a warrant, took him out of his home in his underwear with nothing but Crocs on his feet, took him into a car, drove him around for an hour, and then they later discovered they had the wrong guy, and in fact the guy they were looking for had been in jail all along. We've all seen the photos of the 5-year-old, little Liam, standing there scared in his blue rabbit hat with floppy ears and Spider-Man backpack as agents apprehended him. This administration sent a 2-year-old to Texas. Despite a pending court case, the order was issued, but they didn't want to wait for that, sent the 2-year-old to Texas when the mom was waiting back in Minnesota. Thanks to the late-night work of my staff and several local lawmakers, she's been reunited with her mom. But it should never have come to this. A court case was pending, disregarded. In another instance, a U.S. citizen was forced to the ground, placed in a chokehold, and held at a detention center for hours. He offered multiple times to show his U.S. passport, but was ignored. This has gone so beyond any original reason for federal agents. It has gone well beyond the fraud investigation. That was a good reason to bring people to help. But that's not what this was, not the 2-year-old, not the 5-year-old, not the Hmong elder. Way beyond apprehending violent offenders, not the 2-year-old, not the 5-year-old, not the Hmong elder. This has turned into a Kristi Noem and Greg Bavino-driven shock and awe public spectacle meant to intimidate our state. In fact, Pam Bondi, on the same day Alex was killed, sent a letter to the governor of Minnesota saying the administration would remove these 3,000 ICE agents if Minnesota violated the privacy of its citizens by turning over their personal voter data, something Republican Secretary of States in states like Georgia have refused to do. The Justice Department has actually sued 24 states for refusing to turn over this data, including, as I mentioned, Georgia and also New Hampshire. 3 district court judges have dismissed these cases. It is clear that our state's being targeted, but they've tried to get this data in 24 states. Now they'll say, we'll bring out the ICE agents. If only you just give us that data. Mr. President, there are 3,000 federal officers in Minnesota, and I can not state it more unequivocally. ICE must leave Minnesota. Law enforcement has made this clear. They can't do their jobs. They can't do their jobs. They can't investigate burglaries. They can't help on some complex cases because they're being called to people's homes all the time because of the ICE agents hanging around homes of just regular citizens, in parking lots, chasing people down. Local businesses, business leaders have come out and said, enough. Police chiefs in our state have joined together. Police chiefs across the nation have joined together and said, we believe in proper police procedures and the rule of law. But the biggest story out of this is the everyday people, the ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They've rallied together, brought food to their neighbors, drove other kids to school, showed up for small businesses, and marching 50,000 strong. I was there. I saw it. 50,000 peaceful marchers in -10 below weather. You know, 250 years ago, our nation declared independence from a king. Our nation was born from a deep revulsion to the idea of an illegal occupation, a standing army of British troops literally taking over our streets, demanding to see papers, acting with cruelty, resorting to violence. In those times, newspapers shared what was happening. Well, today, Americans are seeing it firsthand on video. Americans heard Renee Good's final words to the officer who shot her, "I'm not mad at you." They saw Alex spend his final moments trying to help a woman who'd been shoved to the ground. His last words, "Are you okay?" And just as Americans fought for liberty 250 years ago, they're standing up for liberty now. People across the country are speaking out against this cruelty. And of course, it is good that Bovino was removed. Other people have to be removed too. Kristi Noem shouldn't be in her job anymore. But mostly, we need these ICE agents out of Minnesota. And we hope that happens soon. Border Patrol, they've began that removal, but the ICE agents have to get out of Minnesota. It is a very dangerous situation. I spoke with Alex's parents the next day after we lost him. Through the tears, they talked about what he was like and how they wanted the world to know the truth and how much it hurt him to have senior administrative officials call him a domestic terrorist, call him a would-be assassin. Alex's sister said Alex always wanted to make a difference in this world, and it's devastating that he won't be here to witness the impact that he was making. We must stand up. And so we are asking our colleagues, they know the White House, we've all done our best here, but to tell them it's time for those ICE agents to come home. There must be new leadership in the Department of Homeland Security now. And there must be major reforms to these agencies before this Congress should approve another cent. First, we need to stop these roving bans. This means coordination with state and local law enforcement and no more bounties that encourage immigration officials to detain individuals, even without cause. We need proper training and a code of conduct that includes transparent investigations and meaningful accountability for when agents break the law or violate the Constitution. This also means use of force policies that are the same for local police. Immigration agents, like all law enforcement, should comply with the Fourth Amendment. This bounty system, we've had stories and we have hundreds of cases in our offices right now where people were stopped, a white guy, a Latino, they said, "Latino, where are you from?" Latino says, "I was born in America." They put him in the car, drive him a few blocks, let him out, or take him to the detention center and then let him go. Bonuses, bounties. The mask should come up and the body camera should go on. And there must be thorough, objective, and independent investigations into these killings. The Justice Department refused to cooperate with local investigators in Minnesota after Renee's death, and over a dozen career prosecutors in Minnesota and Washington resigned rather than take part in a miscarriage of justice. After Alex's killing, the federal government blocked state law enforcement from accessing the crime scene. I know because I got panic calls, because I used to be prosecutor in the county, about what was going on. A federal judge appointed by Donald Trump had to issue an order preventing the federal government from destroying evidence. I'm opposed to this ICE funding bill, and I am very appreciative that people are starting to talk about reforms to this agency. But the money that was passed this summer, $75 billion, making this agency bigger than the FBI, that was wrong. I opposed it, as did my Democratic colleagues. The costs continue to mount. Right now, our federal, state, and local governments are spending an estimated $18 million a week on the surge in Minnesota alone. And what do you got out of it? 2 out of 3 of the shootings resulting in death in Minneapolis, 2 out of 3 were caused by federal agents. I appreciate Senator Schumer, and I appreciate my colleague, Senator Smith, and so many others for saying no to this. And I truly appreciate that a number of our Republican colleagues have started to say that what ICE is doing is wrong. A few have said that Kristi Noem should no longer be in her job. ICE needs to leave Minnesota. It was in 1776 when future First Lady Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John Adams, describing the retreat of British ships from Boston, saying that their numbers were so large they looked like a forest. But despite their force, it was the determination of those demanding liberty that won that day. For Minnesotans right now, every corner, everywhere, when you drive, really it's not just the city, suburbs, shopping malls, rural areas, they see an ICE agent. There's people that are scared every single day, and it feels like that forest. But out of that forest comes these people of our state that are willing to stand up, citizens that are willing to stand up to help people they may not even know, because they understand what's at stake for the liberties of this country. Mr. President, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, and all of our colleagues who are joining us on the floor this afternoon. So we are here today because we have a full-blown, dangerous emergency unfolding in Minnesota. It is happening right now as I speak, and we need your help to end it. America needs your help. The nation has been appalled by what we have seen happening in our state of Minnesota, the stories that have captured everyone's attention. 2 innocent United States citizens, Alex Preddy and Renee Good, shot and killed on the street in broad daylight by federal agents, just as they were trying to help their neighbors and document with their telephones what was going on, the brutality of it. A 5-year-old in a Spider-Man backpack, Liam Conejo Ramos. So Liam is coming home with his dad, and the agents are there, and Liam is trying to get inside. The agents try to use Liam as bait to lure the mother outside. And Liam is still in detention. He's still in Texas, a 5-year-old, 1,000 miles away from home. Colleagues, my head is so full of stories that might not have gotten all of the attention, but tell the tale of the brutality and the illegality of Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota. This is about a United States citizen, a young man who's walking out of his place of work to get lunch, and he sees an ICE agent. He's concerned. He's afraid that he might get targeted, so he turns around and he walks the other way, and the ICE agent runs after him and tackles the guy. He's a United States citizen, throws him to the ground, injures him, and detains him for hours. All the while, this young man has documents to prove who he is. It's about a teenager in Willmar, Minnesota. Now, Mr. President, Willmar is a smaller regional center in Minnesota. It is a place where the Jennie-O turkey processing plant is. It is an incredible community. And here is a teenager in Willmar who is stopped by ICE. She is beaten, she gets a concussion, and she is detained for 2 days, and she is a United States citizen. So imagine, it's hard to imagine this, but imagine you're in your neighborhood and there are these roving bands of federal agents. They have no identification. They drive around in black Suburbans. They have masks over their face. And like at the drop of the hat, they just leap out and they go after people. They're restraining them. They're hitting them. They're spraying them with chemical agents. And then people are just shoved into Suburbans and driven off. And nobody really knows what happens to them. This is happening in Minnesota if it isn't happening in your neighborhood. And I want people to understand this is not just Minneapolis and St. Paul, where so many of the TV cameras have been. It is Rochester, Minnesota, where the schools are reporting a huge fall off of kids going to school because they're so afraid. Their families are so afraid to send them to school. It's in Mankato, Minnesota, which is in the southern part of the state. It is another regional center, a farming community. I heard today on the public radio station that the local immigrant rights organization is getting 400 calls a day from people who are trying to figure out what their rights are, what to do. A family member of mine is detained. I don't know where they are. This is happening in dozens of cities. So what we have here, colleagues, is a campaign. It is a campaign not about public safety. It is a campaign about fear and intimidation. This is about secret police roaming in our cities with no identification and no name tags. What they do is they overtly target individuals because of the accent that they have, the skin color that they have. And I'm not just imagining this as their motivation, because these agents are telling people this is what's going on. I mean, this is the story of a Hmong woman that I met at Hmong Village just last week, who in tears is telling me that her son has been detained. He's been gone for days and days and days, and she doesn't know when she's going to get him back. Where is he? This is about ICE agents going to a suburban restaurant in the Twin Cities, having lunch, and then after lunch they go into the kitchen to detain the folks that are working in the kitchen. We are seeing this happen every single day. Battering down doors, breaking car windows. There's no pretext, there's no warrant. They're targeting people, not because they know that they've committed some crime, but because of what they look like. And there's this thing that we have in the Twin Cities now, they're called ghost cars. What's this? This is a car that is left in the street, the middle of the street sometimes, the door open, the engine running, the key still in the car, and nobody's gone. Nobody's there. People know what happened. ICE came and got whoever was driving the car and took them away. You know, if you are going through a legal immigration process in this country, you go through a process, and it's your obligation, your legal obligation, to check in with the federal authorities. And what's happening now is that folks are getting legal residence, getting a letter to appear. They have a choice. They know that if they don't comply, they're breaking the law, so of course they comply. But when they go to the courthouse, what happens is an agent is waiting outside the courthouse. An agent is there to detain that person who is following the law, who has done nothing wrong. In fact, they're doing everything they possibly can do to comply with the law, and yet they're being detained. These are not, my colleagues, these are not what you hear from this administration about the so-called worst of the worst. These are people that are active contributing members of our community. These are legal residents who hold green cards, who are being flown to Texas with no legal representation, no access to counsel. And you know what happens sometimes? They get down there, they go through another screening, and the federal agents say, okay, sorry about that, we made a mistake, and they just dump them on the streets of Houston or wherever they may be. No documents, no identification. How are they going to even get home? That's happening in this country right now. And if they're not released, because not everyone is released, if they are not released, people have died in custody. People with no criminal record have been deported to countries that they have never even known. So this is happening in Minnesota, but this is not just Minnesota. I think because Minnesota has resisted so strongly and because the tactics of Operation Metro Surge have been so brutal that we have gotten so much of the attention. But this is not just a Minnesota problem. I ask you, colleagues, to consider how these dangerous and poorly trained and unaccountable ICE agents have been treating Americans who have been exercising their constitutional right to peacefully speak and to demonstrate. These Americans have been intimidated, they have been taunted, they have been beaten, they had even been killed. We've seen the images of people being maced at point-blank range. You can see this in the final pictures of Alex Preddy before he is killed. We know that they are tracking demonstrators with facial ID technology, following them home to intimidate them. And in fact, I've heard stories of demonstrators who have been led home by ICE agents so that those agents are communicating, we know where you live, we know who you are, we want you to be quiet. Pepper balls, tear gas. And this is not just happening, colleagues, in situations of civil unrest. I'm not talking about riots here. I'm talking about a family that is trying to get home. They've got 6 kids in the car. They've been at basketball practice, and they end up with a can of tear gas thrown under their car. It explodes. It lifts the car up off the ground. And that family ends up in the emergency room. They need to be decontaminated from the poison. Now, I'm telling you these stories because I want you to understand a very important thing. What is going on in Minnesota is not about public safety. It has nothing to do with public safety. In fact, what's going on in Minnesota is hurting public safety. As Senator Klobuchar said, police chiefs of suburban communities have come forward and said, this is not sustainable, this is dangerous. A police chief told the story about how one of his own officers, who was off duty, was stopped for no reason by ICE agents, and they threatened to get her out of the car and take her away before she finally tells them, she decides, I have to tell them that I'm a police officer, and they leave her alone. This is about people dialing 911 because an ICE agent is at their home and they are so scared about what to do. So, Mr. President, I want to be clear, we are pro-public safety in Minnesota. We have worked often with federal authorities to catch bad guys and lock them up. But we need ICE out of Minnesota. What is really going on here is a systemic and organized campaign of fear and intimidation. This is government police sanctioned at the highest levels of our government, completely unbound, beating and attacking and detaining and arresting and killing American citizens. This is what America looks like with an authoritarian government with no laws. But here's what's happening. Not only in Minnesota, but around the country. Our constituents, your constituents, are watching these videos and they're hearing these stories and they are reading these reports, and what's happening is a sense of moral outrage is rising up. That feeling that you have in your gut that feeling of anguish and anger and disgust, that is when you know that you're seeing something that is just wrong. You know that it is wrong and that you can't look away from it. And we are uplifted by this moral outrage and the incredible courage of Minnesotans, but we know what we are seeing here. And people are responding everywhere. I have talked to hundreds of people over the past few weeks about what is going on in Minnesota, people who are organizing mutual aid to get groceries and diapers to families, but small town folks that hate to see this happen to their neighbors, and local mayors and farmers and small businesses, Democrats, Republicans, people who aren't political at all, law enforcement officers, faith leaders, Second Amendment supporters and civil libertarians. I mean, and the man in the truck that I saw when I was in Minneapolis taking groceries to people on Monday. He's in the truck and I drive up. He's like first kind of concerned that I might be ICE. And then he's worried that I'm going to think that he's ICE. And we start to talk. And he says of the president, he said, I voted for him. I told my kids, I talked my kids into voting for him. And I am so upset. I am so embarrassed. I never thought that this would happen. This is so messed up. This, colleagues, is the coalition of the horrified, the people who see this and feel a sense of moral outrage, people who are bound together not by politics or faction or identity, but that feeling in your gut that what you're seeing is wrong and that we have to do something about it, that this can't be how we operate. So that brings us to here today in this august chamber of the United States Senate. And we ask ourselves, okay, what do we do? What is our place here? And we've all worked really hard to get here. And we all are here, I believe, because we love this country. And I suspect that almost all of us who serve in this chamber understand, they see the threat, we see the threat that this poses to the very underpinnings of our country. And I am so grateful to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, who have spoken out, who have called for a fair and impartial investigation, who have called for changes of leadership. I agree with that. That's all really important. But colleagues, that is not going to be enough to stop this. This is a crucial moment in our country, not just for Minnesota, but for our entire country. And our answer to the question of what we do in the face of this illegality, this brutality, our answer to all those people, all those constituents who feel that sense of moral outrage, who are begging us to stand up for them, our answer can't be that we're not going to do anything. It can't be the status quo. It can't be, well, the procedures of the Senate and the House make it really impossible for us to get something done, so there's really not that much that we can do right now. That's not acceptable. But colleagues, I can see a path forward. And look, I want to be really clear. In my view, we need to start over with the Department of Homeland Security. I think it should be ripped down to the studs and that we should start over. But that is not the question for today. That is not the question for right now. Right now, we need to take immediate, common sense steps to stop the worst of the violence and the violations that Americans are suffering. So, to be clear, I will not vote for any funding for DHS if we do not take action to stop this emergency unfolding in my state. And I truly believe that we can find agreement on both sides of the aisle for a path forward. And it will not solve all of these problems, but we can address the worst of the assault. We need to end these roving patrols of federal agents that are detaining and arresting people who've done nothing wrong. You can't break down someone's door and arrest them without a warrant. We need accountability. I mean, ICE agents should be required to abide by the same set of laws, the same use of force standards that your local police department abides by. We need a fair and unbiased investigation. And we need no more of the secret police. No more masks and agents without proper identification and body cameras. I mean, to me, these seems like pretty simple and common sense and reasonable reforms that can only be achieved through the force of law. We are long past the moment where any letter or executive order or promise can secure our trust. This is our path forward. I am thinking about, as I wrap up this speech, and I'm thinking about all of my colleagues who are here to speak with such intention about what's happening. I want to just take a pause to acknowledge my beloved Minnesota. I am so proud to be your senator. And you know, so many people around the country are looking to you, to us, for hope. And you are showing the world how to respond to violence and how to stand up to bullies with strength and with dignity and with peace. You're putting your own safety and your own bodies on the line to protect your neighborhoods and your democracy. You're risking your own safety to document the emergency and the inhumanity unfolding on our streets. And you're even sometimes doing it by singing. In Minnesota, we show up for our neighbors. We help people out. We don't give in to bullies. We stand strong. We stand in the park with a candle in our hands to mourn, but also to kindle hope. And I know that Minnesotans are going to stay strong because, as Dr. King preached, we know how to put our faith into action. As Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Hawaii.
I want to thank the senator from Minnesota, junior and the senior senator from Minnesota, for their incredible leadership and serving as a ballast, not just for the people of their country, of their state, but for the whole country. Tyranny is tyranny, and the people of this country, whatever our other differences, don't want anything to do with it. You might be a liberal, you might be a conservative, you might be for immigration, or you might be against it. You might think that guns should be more readily accessible, or you might think that guns should be harder to purchase. But when the United States government is killing your fellow citizens in your name, none of that matters. Because tyranny is tyranny, no matter the tyrant. Overreach is overreach, regardless of cause, and state violence is state violence. And it is against everything that this country stands for. There is a reason that a very unusual and unusually broad coalition of unlikely partners quickly converged in the wake of the tragedy, and it wasn't some organizing strategy. This was organic across the country and certainly across the great state of Minnesota. It was liberals, it was conservatives, it was gun owners, it was clergy members, it was business executives, it was libertarians, it was Trump voters. Why the new unity? Because people from different places and persuasions, faiths, and financial situations understand that at least on the very narrow question of freedom and liberty, our fates and our futures are intertwined. No one is free until everyone is free. In my Jewish tradition, during Passover Seder, it's customary to recount the story of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. And the reason the story is told anew every year is to remind us that the struggle for freedom is not confined to the past and limited to others, but instead has to live inside of all of us. The Haggadah says, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God brought us out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Not they, but we. The point being that however many generations removed we are from that story, we're still obligated to see ourselves as though we were personally freed from slavery in Egypt. No one is free until everyone is free. Our founders knew that too. The Constitution deliberately begins with we, the people. The Declaration of Independence promises equality and certain unalienable rights that we hold to be self-evident. A collective responsibility to protect freedom and liberty is central to the American experiment. It always has been, which is why in the summer of '63, sitting in a dark jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, in the throes of the battle for civil rights, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all, indirectly. No one is free until everyone is free." That same spirit of solidarity has united people for generations. In Hawaii, it was the sugar plantation workers in the 40s, tired of being overworked and underpaid, who organized across ethnic lines for fairer conditions. Up until that point, they had been divided by the plantation owners into separate camps: Chinese camp, Japanese camp, Filipino camp, and so on, and paid different rates for the same work. And so they came together vowing to treat an injury to one as an injury to all. They went on strike and won, altering the trajectory of workers in Hawaii to this day. An injury to one is an injury to all. No one is free until everyone is free. If there's a lesson in this collective outrage and widespread condemnation of ISIS conduct, it's that people don't want state-sponsored violence on their streets in their names. It's not a question of whether you voted for Trump or Biden. It's not a question of whether you agree with Joe Biden's immigration policy. And the idea that the immigration enforcement has to be accompanied by enthusiastic cruelty is so far out of the mainstream of American society. Nobody wants this save for a handful of people intoxicated by power and deluded by their own fantasies. Thuggery is not strength. Strength must be used to protect people, to give a voice to the voiceless and make people feel safe. That is impressive and noble and important, precisely because it's harder to practice and harder still to come by. But that's what makes the response in Minnesota of ordinary Americans taking it upon themselves to stand up for their neighbors so extraordinary. I want to read a bit of what Adam Serwer observed in The Atlantic about the mistaken assumptions that fed this administration's brutality. He wrote, "The secret fear of the morally depraved is that virtue is actually common, and that they're the ones who are alone. In Minnesota, all of the ideological cornerstones of MAGA have been proved false at once. Minnesotans, not the armed thugs of ICE and Border Patrol, are brave. Minnesotans have shown that their community is socially cohesive because of its diversity, not in spite of it. Minnesotans have found and loved one another in a world atomized by social media, where empty men have tried to fill their lonely souls with lies about their own inherent superiority. Minnesotans have preserved everything worthwhile about Western civilization, while armed brutes try to tear it down by force." End quote. Look, I get that we're all divided and distracted and exhausted and that it's not going to resolve overnight. But in the wake of the tragedies in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, a bright red line has emerged. We can argue about everything else, but we will not tolerate tyranny. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I rise today in disbelief of where we are as a country. I will tell you, in listening to the speeches that came before me, such powerful words, I thought to myself, what can I actually contribute to this moment? As a matter of fact, when my colleagues said that they were going to schedule this floor block, I never thought about what I would say. I just said yes. And in my mind, there are a few things I do want to say. First, I want to start off by thanking my sister senators, Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Tina Smith, as well as former colleague, Representative Ilhan Omar, for your strength and leadership in such a trying time. Secondly, I want to acknowledge the people of Minnesota who have been through so much. I recall years ago going to Minnesota myself for the memorial service for George Floyd and being with the community to have conversations about community policing. And then witnessing the tragedy of Melissa Hortman and so much that has happened in that state. And so to the people of Minnesota, I want to say thank you for showing us strength, resilience, what it truly means to be your sister's keeper, your brother's keeper, and to show up for your neighbors. You are truly inspirational. I guess what has been on my heart is the history of this country. We will be celebrating Black History Month. And at a time where history is trying to be replaced, erased, I think it's important to think back on the things that we have been through and what it took to make it through those times were not necessarily our eloquent speeches, but it was that everyday people did something. And so right now, the words that are ringing through my head are that they had their time, this is our time. We didn't ask for it, but we are prepared for it, whether we know it or not. And the three words that stick in my head right now is, now we must. It's our time. It's our time to stand up for our brothers and sisters across this country. When the administration first signaled their goals to do these kinds of interventions across the country, it was to arrest violent criminals. That's what I heard. But in reality, when you see a mother of three shot, when you see an ICU nurse who works for the Veterans Administration shot and killed, when you see children and families and pastors and priests and people across the country, not just in Minnesota, concerned to even walk in their own neighborhoods, maybe because of their color or their accent. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So that means each and every one of us has to do what we can in this moment to prevent this lawless chaos that is happening on our streets. I will say that what we are trying to put forward as Democrats, again, is just common sense, practical, actually safety measures to keep our country safe. And so as we think about the fact that right now there are armed cars roving, people in masks that we don't even know who they are, they should be identified. People shouldn't have to worry about carrying their papers with them. When we think about the process, people shouldn't be knocking on your doors and pulling you outside of your house. You don't even get a chance to put on your clothes, and they don't have a criminal warrant. They should be following the same rules as our state and local police officers follow in our states. Because what we're hearing is their efforts right now are making it even more difficult for law enforcement to do their jobs and keep us safe. And so there are, in this moment, things that each of us can do. And I hope that our Republican colleagues will join us. I hope they will join us in making sure that not only do we continue to have public safety that includes the public and our law enforcement, but that we reform an agency that has received over $75 billion as a slush fund. We want to make sure that money is targeted, that people are trained, and that they are doing what is right, and that they are doing at least what our state and local police officers do. And I want to end by just saying that I didn't come to give a big formal speech. I came to say that each and every one of us in this moment can do our part. Our senators, again, thank you so much to Amy. Thank you so much to Tina for your strength and for your example. Again, I encourage our Republican colleagues to join us as we reform and change that agency, meaning ICE and DHS. But more importantly, I think what is at the core of all of this is that we still have a democracy when it's all said and done. And so my call again is for each of us to just do your part, to stay strong. And I will not be voting for this package if we do not pull out DHS and have those reforms that we spoke of. And I again want to just say, it's our turn. Now we must. I yield back.
Recognize the senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, thank you so much, and what an honor it is to be together with my colleagues from Minnesota to appreciate their leadership and how they've stood in the gap for Minnesotans who have really suffered in these last weeks, to be together with so many colleagues on the floor to talk about this most existential moment. You don't have to be a spiritual or religious person to when you see a mother murdered and her last name is Good, the murder of Good, it should make all of us step back and look in the mirror and ask what it means. You do not have to be a spiritually attuned person to watch a VA employee ICU nurse get 10 bullets in his back and step back and ask, who are we? These images are going around the world, and people are not looking at these images as who a particular person or administration is. They're looking at this as, is this who America is? And that is what this debate is about. I take this very personally, Mr. President. From birth to age 2, I was a Minnesotan. I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. I still have family connections in Minnesota. I then was a Kansan until I was 26, and my more persuasive Virginian wife convinced me to become a Virginian. And now, 42 years later, I still have these strong feelings and ties about the state where I was born. And as I watch the events and I hear the pain and I get the dispatches from friends and family who are in the midst of this, sharing with me the stories, much as my colleagues have shared them today, I realize this isn't just about Minnesota. It could be anywhere in our country. Although I will express this question, could it be anywhere? Because it does seem as if the administration is targeting this kind of rogue violence in certain communities, not others. And when the Attorney General of the United States, our nation's chief law enforcement officer, by letter suggests that the rogue activities in Minnesota could stop if Minnesota would only turn over its voting rolls, it does make you wonder, as my colleague Senator Smith asked, is this really about law enforcement? But the fear that immigrant communities and others who want to peacefully assemble and present grievances about government, a right guaranteed in the First Amendment, that fear is something that isn't just in Minnesota. It's in my community too. I live in Richmond, Virginia. The Commonwealth has a population that is about 12% immigrant. The church I go to is heavily a Congolese parish. It's a Catholic parish. Many folks in the Congo are Catholics, and we have seen a refugee population grow in my parish. We have immigrant communities all over. The meeting that I had right before I came to the floor was with a Cub Scout troop from McLean, Virginia, and they talked to me about the rights of immigrants because so many of them or their parents are immigrants. And the fear in our immigrant communities is palpable. Even when there haven't been roving patrols, will they start tomorrow? You see reduced attendance at child care centers. You see reduced attendance at church events because people hear rumors that if they go, they might be targeted. The fear is palpable. What I want to just say, Mr. President, that I hope we'll kind of bear in mind in this is we all come to this place with different life experiences, and a life experience that I've had that is, different than some is I've been a mayor and a governor and know what it is to have a police force. When I was the mayor of Richmond, we had a police force. When I was the governor of Virginia, we had the Virginia State Police. And let me tell you something police forces don't like. They don't like roving bands of people with masks and without IDs roving through their communities without coordinating with them. In Virginia, this kind of started a couple of months back in a couple of our courthouses who are patrolled by deputy sheriffs. The court function and jails are run by sheriffs in Virginia, and they're there to provide security. And in courthouses in Chesterfield and Albemarle County in Virginia, they started to see masked, unidentified folks show up to grab people. Now, these are courthouses that are guarded by deputy sheriffs with weapons who are there to provide stability and security. And when there are masked people coming into the courts to grab others who don't identify themselves or coordinate with local law enforcement, you raise the risk of a horrible, horrible injury or accident or tragedy occurring. And now we see this happening in Minnesota and elsewhere. At a minimum, the mayor and governor and me says we should not be allowing these roving patrols to run roughshod in local communities without fully getting the approval and the coordination with state and local law enforcement authorities. Anything short of that treats state and local law enforcement as if they're the enemies instead of partners to try to promote public safety. And the other thing that I would point out before handing it off to my next colleague is something that's just so common. It's so common in law enforcement at the state and local level. If there's an officer-involved shooting in virtually any law enforcement agency in this country, the officer involved in the shooting is immediately put on administrative leave. That's not a judgment that they were wrong. It's just a judgment that a shooting is so serious that there should be an investigation before that officer is allowed to return to duty. This is standard operating procedure in tiny town police offices that have a handful of officials in Virginia and elsewhere, and yet that is not what is being done at the federal level. In fact, the Washington Post ran a wonderful story yesterday that analyzed many instances of DHS officials shooting folks, and before an investigation was even done, the administration is out vindicating them, not putting them on administrative leave, and finally even blaming victims, calling them domestic terrorists and assassins. And that's the last thing I want to say, Mr. President. The scale of the lie goes up depending upon the depth of the shame and guilt feeling. And so when someone is killed and a key cabinet secretary jumps out, or a key White House official to label them as a domestic terrorist or an assassin, clearly contradicting all the available evidence that every American and every person in the world can see, you know that the lie is being magnified to cover up the depth of shame and guilt that that individual is feeling. It's time for us to do right by reforms, but it's also time to stop lying. Stop lying about these people who are standing up and trying to be good neighbors and protect their fellow man. Stop calling them domestic terrorists. Stop calling them would-be assassins. Stop trying to trash their memories, pour salt in the wounds of their parents and their loved ones and their children's to cover up your own lack of responsibility and your lack of accountability. We're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make sure that you're accountable, not based on a promise of future action by this administration. We need to get the 5 bills done we can get done and then turn to a DHS reform that is put in law, that is signed by the president, so that when the president or his cronies decide later to break it, we can go to court and enforce it. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, on Saturday, America witnessed another horrific tragedy in Minneapolis when Alex Preedy was shot and killed by Department of Homeland Security law enforcement agents. By all accounts, Alex was a dedicated member of his community. He served as an intensive care nurse at the Veterans Clinic in Minneapolis, and on Saturday, he was simply exercising his rights as an American, the very same rights for those veterans that he fought to protect. He used his First Amendment right of free speech to show up for his community and record interactions between Homeland Security officers and his neighbors. When agents became violent with a female protester, he stepped in to protect her. He also exercised his Second Amendment right to bear arms, and despite no evidence that he was threatening anyone or holding anything but a phone in his hands, officers still shot him repeatedly and killed him. The American people have watched the videos. They have seen with their own eyes the evidence of DHS's unjustified behavior and excessive use of force. But mere moments after the shots were fired, DHS officials jumped to the claim that Mr. Preedy was a domestic terrorist and an assassin who wanted to massacre law enforcement. I want to be very clear with this, Mr. President. Those statements are lies. They are lies used to justify the unjustifiable actions of some DHS officers. The blatant lies of DHS leadership and misconduct by the officers involved in the killings of Alex Prady and Renee Good are indefensible, and they cannot stand. They violate the public trust and stand in direct opposition to the values and the professionalism of many federal law enforcement officers who follow the law and serve with integrity every day. But since these tragic events, people from every corner of America have made their voices heard. My office has heard from thousands of Michiganders about their outrage at the fatal shootings of both Renee Good and Alex Prady. The American people's message is loud and it is clear. They're fed up with the Trump administration's mishandling of immigration enforcement, and they are demanding that we do something about it. Americans have every right to be enraged. I am outraged, and every member of this chamber should also be enraged. This is certainly not the country that I grew up in, and this is certainly not the country that we can leave to the next generation. In this moment, we have no choice but to stand up for our communities, for Renee Good, for Alex Prady, and for the very principles that our country was founded on. That's why I will be voting no on the bill before us, unless DHS funding is stripped out or unless critical reforms are incorporated into the bill. If the leader put the other 5 appropriation bills on the floor today, they would pass. They would pass with bipartisan support, overwhelming bipartisan support. But DHS components have unique but important functions beyond immigration enforcement, securing our borders, combating human trafficking, seizing deadly narcotics being smuggled into our country, and facilitating trade and travel. But personnel from these components have been pulled from their core missions and have instead been pressured to focus exclusively on arbitrary quotas and removing immigrants from our country, and even those who pose no serious threat to public safety. This corruption of DHS mission has directly contributed to the chaos and violence that we have seen in Minneapolis and communities all across our country. And that's why Senate Democrats are calling for common sense reforms. Reforms like ensuring DHS officers wear clear identification so people knew who they are dealing with in law enforcement and then can hold them accountable. Requiring DHS personnel to wear body cameras so that we have proper recordings of their conduct in immigration enforcement. And, Mr. President, requiring proper investigations after tragedies occur, like the recent shootings of both Renee Good and Alex Prady. These are just a few examples of common sense practices that strengthen accountability and help ensure the safety of both law enforcement and our communities. Our local law enforcement personnel already follow them, and we shouldn't expect anything less from our federal law enforcement. There's no question immigration enforcement is necessary, but we must conduct it in a way that is both humane and safe. Clearly, that's not how this agency is operating today. But now is the time to act, and I urge our Republican colleagues to join us in putting real guardrails in place and not just acting as a rubber stamp for the Trump administration. President, I yield.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Vermont.
first I want to acknowledge my colleagues from Minnesota, Senator Smith and Senator Klobuchar. You have conveyed to us the deep pain and anguish that you feel and that every Minnesotan feels about the shocking shootings that occurred in your state. And this follows on tragedies that occurred before this. And the pain of your community is the pain of this United States Senate. And my deep appreciation, and I know I express that on behalf of all of my colleagues, for you putting this in a human, real perspective. Thank you very much. Second, this is shocking. 2 people got shot for no reason. Absolutely no reason. Renee Good, a 37-year-old mom, 3 kids. She was protesting. That officer walked from the back of her car to the side of her car to the front of her car. He shot through the front windshield and then moved to the side and shot 2 shots in the driver's side window. That's what happened. And then Alex Preddy, who was out with his cell phone camera observing what was going on and was shocked, I'm sure, to see that an ICE agent was pushing a woman into the snowbank, and he came over to try to get between them. There was a scuffle. He was in total subjugation by the officers who had him on the ground. He was disarmed, never using, by the way, or even threatening to use the gun that he had legally in his possession. And ICE officers, 2 of them, shot him 10 times. 10 times. That's what happened. And why aren't we all just totally shocked? That's not acceptable. And then, that is all done with the authority of the state, with no restraint. And then, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who's responsible for the training and the discipline and the mission, blows this off and says these 2 people were domestic terrorists. No accountability, no expression of sadness, no expression of remorse. How is this acceptable to any one of us here? How is that acceptable? And yet what we're hearing when we are saying, let's look into this, let's get some reforms in place that allow our citizens to feel safe, for there to be accountability, we're being told it's too complicated because we've already got a bill and we'll have to divide it. And that means procedural hassles. That means, oh, the House will have to come back. Are we serious? That's called doing your job. It's called accountability. It's called taking responsibility. I want to pay tribute to the people of Minnesota. We're actually having a discussion about inconveniencing House members because they've got to get on a plane and come back if we act to do something that every American knows we should do. Pass the bipartisan bills where we've got 5 bills done and take on the burden of responsibility that we have as a United States Senate to put reforms in an agency that needs reform. And folks in Minnesota, it's 20 degrees below zero. They're out in the streets. They're out protesting peacefully. They're out providing coffee and cocoa and some warm soup to each other so they can get through this. Why are they doing it? You know what? They care about the right of assembly. They care about the First Amendment. They care about their constitutional rights. But the reason they're doing it is they care about each other. That's who they care about. In this United States Senate, our job is to care about every single American. And we have an agency that is totally out of control with a leader that is, you know, I would say it's incompetent. But the cruelty of that remark, to dismiss 2 people, innocent people who died as domestic terrorists, tells me there's not an inkling of acceptance of responsibility that goes with the enormously important job of being Secretary of Homeland Security. So I'm not going to vote and give a blank check where we're not even willing to have a discussion about what the reforms are. And Mr. President, I want to say I know every one of us here are shocked by what happened. This is not a Republican-Democratic deal. This is about seeing 2 innocent people shot. And they didn't need to be. And you know, One of the things that's so important for us, if we have a family, we live in a community, is to act in a way where the people around us can be confident that we've got their back, that we won't hurt them or harm them, that we notice what their struggles are and we'll try to help. And you know, all of us here have such admiration for law enforcement and the work they do, and it's such an incredibly hard job. But more than anyone else, the people contacting me in Vermont to express their shock at what happened in Minnesota are people in law enforcement. They know the job is hard, but they have accepted the responsibility to be a guardian, to be protective. We can accept our responsibility where we are the 100 people in this country, in this Senate, who have the opportunity to provide some reassurance and safety and confidence to the people each and every one of us represents. So yes, let's do our job. Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from California.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join my colleagues that have spoken in really saying my heart goes out to my colleagues from Minnesota, both the senior and the junior senator, and the people of Minnesota for what they have been through these last few weeks and how they have responded these last few weeks as they've mourned and as the country's been watching. January 7th feels like so long ago now, but just a few weeks ago is a day that I never would have imagined. That day, Renee Nicole Good, a mother, a daughter, a poet, was out in her community, observing, helping to document, as allowed by the law, what was happening when she was alerted about these ongoing indiscriminate raids in her community. As several of my colleagues have spoken, the administration's response to the federal agents killing Renee Good was not one of, whoa, hold on, let's really assess what's happened here. It was one of blaming her. The response was so faulty by the administration. Forget the investigations that should have taken place, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But when the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States responds to an incident like that by messaging to federal agents, don't worry, you have complete immunity. First of all, that's not true. Second of all, it's the opposite of the message that we should be sending if we're trying to de-escalate tensions and make sure that law enforcement abides by the law. And I remind us of that because, sadly, it is not shocking when we reflect on what happened on January 24th. This time, Alex Jeffrey Preddy, a son and an ICU nurse at the local Veterans Administration hospital, was out lawfully, peacefully, observing and helping document more of this ICE and CBP activity in Minneapolis. And he was shot in the back and killed. 2 United States citizens dead at the hands of federal law enforcement in the span of 2.5 weeks. They're dead because ICE and CBP have been encouraged by the White House to act with impunity. Colleagues, it was about 7 months ago that I stood here on the floor to warn all of you and the American people that the Trump administration at the time, so this will go back to last June, the Trump administration was using Los Angeles as a test case, testing how far federal agents could go in this indiscriminate, increasingly violent and cruel mass detention and deportation agenda, how far they could go before exporting this model throughout the country. I never in my life have wanted to say more than I do today that I wish I was wrong. But for the better part of the past year, communities across the country have been subjected to this relentless aggression. Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Portland, Charlotte, and others, and now Minneapolis. You've seen the videos. I've seen the videos. We've all seen the videos. How dare this administration slander the names of the dead and tell the American people not to believe what we can all see so clearly with our own eyes? How dare this administration act as if the laws passed by this body do not apply to them? And so, yes, colleagues, it is time to say enough. This is not just about immigrant families and immigrant communities now living in fear. This is about all of us. No one in this country, immigrant, citizen, veteran, should fear for their life, for exercising their constitutional rights, for standing up for their neighbors. This is not a political or policy disagreement about immigration. This is about decency. This is about humanity. And this is about the rule of law. Now, instead of pursuing independent investigations and seeking to hold officers accountable when and as warranted, this administration has doubled down. Let me take a moment on this, because our colleague, Senator Kane from Virginia, talked a little bit about his experience as governor and mayor and what normally happens after an officer-involved shooting. Normal practice, standard practice, best practice after an officer-involved shooting in a local agency, in a state agency, is not just the officer being placed on leave, but initially there's an administrative review of what happened. Was it not just consistent with policy, but the law and the Constitution? And if not, what is the consequence? Absent that, under normal circumstances, we have a civil rights division of the United States Department of Justice that can conduct an independent investigation and bring forth accountability as and when warranted. Sadly, that is not the case with this administration. Not the objective internal review, not a civil rights division of the Department of Justice review. Instead, they tell officers, you have complete immunity, and they double down. And so the abuse has continued. And by the way, it's not just on the streets. The videos you have not seen is the abuse and inhumane treatment that continues inside some appalling and inhumane private detention facilities, where, colleagues, if you haven't heard, 32 detainees died last year, the most deadly year for those in ICE detention facilities in a long, long time. And an additional 6 this month alone. We're already on track to exceed last year's most deadly number. Talk about the people held in detention centers like the one that Senator Schiff and I visited just last week in California City. Many there being denied basic medical care, even urgent medical care. People denied easy access to legal counsel, to due process, to fundamental dignity. And what has the Republican majority in Congress, how have they responded to this cruel and vindictive mass deportation campaign? Silence. Inexcusable or unacceptable silence. And for those who have not been silenced, I've heard cheering on of what the administration is doing. Colleagues, since last July, there's been dozens of incidents involving excessive force by federal agents, including at least 17 shootings. Instead of asking questions and demanding accountability, our Republican colleagues here have applauded the administration and chosen to give the Department of Homeland Security billions more dollars. And now they're suggesting that DHS needs even more. How much more must our communities and our country endure before our Republican colleagues join us in saying enough? How much more, colleagues, before you agree to impose the real guardrails on a DHS that chooses to investigate itself, that stonewalls oversight, that even fights court orders to preserve evidence in the killing of an American citizen? Not destroying evidence should go without saying. It should be compelled by a federal judge, just like true, objective, independent investigations after incidents like this should go without saying. But we're not living in normal times. We continue to see ICE and CBP behave as though they are above the law. And because this administration has told them they are, and because Republicans in Congress have not told them that they're not. But we have an opportunity to change them, to collectively, on a bipartisan and bicameral basis, let those agents know no one is above the law. That is not just an opportunity, but an obligation that we have in this moment. Public safety depends on legitimacy, and legitimacy depends on accountability and speaking the truth. Our laws mean nothing if those that are assigned to enforce the laws believe that the laws don't apply to them. And so, colleagues, let's realize that we are not powerless in this conversation. Congress is a co-equal branch of government in the United States of America, and it's about time we act like it. That's why I support imposing serious reforms, real oversight, and accountability on ICE and CBP before this body provides them any more taxpayer dollars. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
I recognize the senator from Rhode Island.
I've served as my state's attorney general. I've served as the United States attorney for Rhode Island. I used to lecture at the Police Training Academy in Rhode Island. I know a little bit about police work, and I know bad police work when I see it. What we are seeing in Minnesota is a level of violence, a lack of deconfliction, and flat-out unprofessionalism that is dangerous. And trust me, it's not just me. Let's start with Minneapolis' own police chief. who described ICE's behavior this way: it looks very untrained, it looks unprofessional, it looks very chaotic. He described it as poor tactics and really unconstitutional practices. And he put some good context on it. He said, Minneapolis Police Department went the entire year last year, recovering about 900 guns from the street, arresting hundreds and hundreds of violent offenders, and we didn't shoot anyone. This is the second American citizen that's been killed. This is the third shooting within 3 weeks. And it's not just up in Minnesota. In Maine, a sheriff said, this is Bush League policing. Another Minnesota sheriff said, I'm seeing people being stopped, questioned, and harassed solely because of the color of their skin. A Philadelphia sheriff said that these agents are, quote, made up, fake, wannabe law enforcement. A chief in St. Paul described traffic stops that are, quote, clearly outside the bounds of what federal agents are allowed to do. A former police chief said, their tactics are unsound. I question their training, if any. All the way in Montana, a police chief said, we do not do business in that manner. When you see those types of tactics being used, we don't use those. And in Texas, again, the former head of the Combined Law Enforcement Association described newly recruited masked agents that no doubt damage and destroy the reputations of our proud and professional officers. A law professor and former police officer described the conduct as, quote, egregiously deviating from professional norms of policing. So what we're hearing out of law enforcement professionals around the country is disgust with the lack of professionalism with which ICE and CBP are discharging their responsibilities. And I'll close by talking about deconfliction, because that is probably the most dangerous mistake that law enforcement can make. That's how you get blue-on-blue violence. That's how things get dangerously out of hand. And with respect to deconfliction, a sheriff in Maine talked about unmarked cars and masked individuals, men with guns in the yard, frightening residents, and his office had no idea it was taking place. They hadn't disclosed to the local police that they were going to do a weapons-out armed raid in their jurisdiction. In Brooklyn Park, the chief said that his own officers were being pulled over. The deconfliction was so bad. And he said, if it's happening to our officers, it pains me to think how many of our community members are falling victim to this every day. In Austin, Texas, the chief described how they're not warned ahead of time by ICE when they're going around. That threatens to create dangerous misunderstandings between local and federal law enforcement agencies. We're short on time, so I'm going to end there. But nobody in this body should believe that what is happening, what we're seeing with our own eyes on the streets of Minneapolis, is legitimate or professional law enforcement. It simply is not. It has gotten out of hand, and nobody knows it better than real cops. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from California.
Mr. President, in just 1 year and 1 week, that is 373 days, Donald Trump and his administration have changed what it means to walk down the street in America. 374 days ago, an American citizen did not need to worry about carrying a passport or worry that they would be pinned to the ground for being unable to prove that their hometown was, in fact, the only home they have ever known. 374 days ago, immigrant families didn't need to call on their neighbors or rely on the help of Good Samaritans to grocery shop for them, to take their kids to school, to have access to what we value in life, all because they were afraid to open their door. 374 days ago, standing up for your First Amendment rights, your Fourth Amendment rights, even your Second Amendment rights was not in itself a provocation in the eyes of the federal government. But in so little time, so much has changed. In this America, we see masked agents hiding their faces from the world and even hiding their identification, terrorizing communities across the nation, smashing car windows and dragging mothers and fathers from their vehicles in front of their kids. In front of their kids, often taking those kids and separating them from their parents, breaking down doors, detaining citizens and non-citizens alike. And as for warrants, no, apparently DHS lawyers now claim you don't need a judicial warrant to break through the door of a U.S. citizen and haul them out in their underwear in the dead of winter, only to later release them without charge, without apology, only with newfound terror, courtesy of the United States federal government. Agents with just 47 days of training, sweeping through American cities, agents with barely over a month of training, just 47 days. And why 47? Because it's a nod to the vanity of the 47th president, rather than allocated to the need to be instructed on how to, say, use or avoid using deadly force. Agents with less training than a teenager getting their driver's license are now badgering, beating, and even killing Americans on our streets in the name of the president, while his chosen enforcers smugly walk through American cities, cosplaying their favorite uniforms from the 1930s and 1940s. DHS is now building databases of Americans detaining and even disappearing people off of corners in Minneapolis, Chicago, Portland, Nashville, Los Angeles, and far too many communities across the nation. The Trump administration demanded Republicans deliver a $170 billion taxpayer-funded slush fund for these misbegotten efforts, taking that money away from your health care, taking that money away from food for hungry families to spend on weapons for enforcement agents, and billions on detention centers to imprison people who are undocumented but have committed no crimes and have no criminal records at all. This is the America that Donald Trump has created. But it is not the America that we will accept. We will not accept the labeling of Renee Good, a mother of three, a loving and caring member of her community, caught on camera showing compassion to federal agents even as she protested them. We will not accept that she was killed and then later falsely designated a domestic terrorist. We will not accept that Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old Veterans Administration ICU nurse, exercising his constitutional rights and stooping to help a woman who had been pushed to the ground, can be labeled as an assassin merely hours after being shot in the back in cold blood nearly a dozen times. Now, these were not labels given by some arrogant agent in the field. This was not some bad apple using this terminology amongst otherwise upstanding immigration officials. No, these labels were applied by the highest-ranking officials of this operation in President Trump's White House. The cabinet secretary overseeing these raids, Kristi Noem, the architect of this campaign of fear and mass arrest and detention, the racist-in-chief Stephen Miller. This impunity that we see on our streets, this violence, it comes from the top. Gaslighting amplified by the vice president and the president himself. This brazen denial of rights and facts is in the water at DHS headquarters. And it's increasingly clear that this has been the culture, become the culture of ICE and Customs and Border Protection. And that is why I'm standing here this week to say clearly not another dime for this kind of lawless immigration regime. We will not add to the slush fund that Republicans gave Kristi Noem and Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino last year to fulfill Stephen Miller's dystopian vision of America. We require real reforms in statute, not promises of change, not executive actions worth less than the paper they are printed on. Look out on the streets of Minneapolis, where 2 American citizens have been gunned down in as many weeks, where tear gas flies through the air and doors fly off their hinges under the banner of this administration. And in those streets stand agencies backed by billions of dollars still to be spent, billions that can arm them, billions that can detain and oppress. This is an America in regression, where the color of your skin could be the only pretext for getting pulled over, detained, or worse. A reality that has persisted for blacks, Latinos, Asians, and others, notwithstanding the progress made in my lifetime. As a child of the generation that shone a light on and helped pass laws to end such racist tactics, for most of my life we have made strides to ensure that we moved past that America. But now we are returning to an America that I do not recognize, nor is this an America that I can accept. We have the power in this body to do something about it. And until we do, my vote will reflect my complete and utter rejection of this lawless and cruel regime. This cannot become the status quo. This cannot become the new normal for America, for Alex Preddy and Renee Good, for the Californians detained without cause and without convictions, like those suffering in detention facilities like California City, whom I met along with Alex Padilla last week. For all of them, for their dignity, for their children, for their families, for their friends, for their safety, and for this country, we must act. I yield back.
I recognize the senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I get it. I think most of us get it. A lot of moms and dads throughout America tonight are going to lie down and try to sleep and not be able to. And when moms and dads throughout America lie down to sleep and can't, more times than not in America today, they're worried about the cost of living. I get that. These high prices started under President Biden, but that's not why I'm here today. I don't want to blame this on anyone. It is what it is. I just know that you shouldn't have to sell blood plasma in America to go to the grocery store. I just know that you ought to be able to afford a home in America. It's part of the American dream. The cost has gotten way out of hand. When you're having to pay $500,000, if you can get a loan, to buy and live in a refrigerator box behind Outback, something's wrong in our country. And don't get me started on the cost of health care and health insurance and all the other daily expenses that moms and dads have. They're worried, and I understand they're worried. That's why I want to talk for a few minutes before I talk about Minneapolis, because I do want to address that. But that's why I want to talk for a few minutes about taxes. And I know some may be thinking, why does Kennedy just talked about the cost of living in America. Why does he want to talk about taxes? I know people think I don't like paying taxes. They're thinking, I'd rather have to listen to OJ jokes for the rest of eternity than to have to pay taxes. Nobody likes to pay taxes. It's the price we pay to live in a civilized society. But this year we have some good news with respect to taxes. And it's a result of changes to our tax code, Mr. President, and you know this well, that we made in the One Big Beautiful Bill. We're told not to call it the One Big Beautiful Bill anymore. There's a new name for it, but frankly, I think the American people are smart enough to know what we're talking about, no matter what name we give to it. As a result of the changes that we made, and when I say we, I don't take any joy in having to point out that this was done with only Republican votes. We tried to entice our Democratic friends to join with us. They chose not to. That's their choice. It's a free country. But the tax changes that we made were made solely with Republican votes, and I'm proud of them. And I hope both Republicans and Democrats take advantage of them. As a result of these tax changes, the American people are going to receive up to $100 billion in tax refunds. $100 billion, not million, $100 billion. What am I talking about? Many people, as you know, Mr. President, who are in the hospitality business are no longer going to have to pay for their 2025 taxes on tips. Not everybody. I don't want to overstate the case. But many of our people in the hospitality industry who make most of their income from tips, as a result of the changes we made for 2025, we meaning the Republicans, are not going to have to pay taxes on a portion of those tips. Many folks in 2025, not everyone, but many people in 2025 who worked overtime, they're not going to have to pay taxes, income taxes on that overtime. That also is contributing to this $100 billion that's going to be returned to the American people in tax refunds. In our One Big Beautiful Bill, we also increased the standard deduction for a two-parent or two-income household. We increased the standard deduction by $1,500. It's going to mean a lot of money back in people's pockets. The standard deduction for joint filers is now $31,500. As we were making these tax changes, and we again, regrettably, we did it with only Republican votes. We had to. But as we made these tax changes, we also put in a tax reduction for our seniors. People over 65, not everybody, but many Americans over 65 are going to get a new $6,000 senior reduction. What else did we do? Well, if you pay state and local taxes, real estate taxes, for example, property taxes, we changed the deduction from $10,000 to $40,000. So that means you have a higher deduction on your taxes, means your taxes are going to go down. We increased the child tax credit. It's now $2,200 for every child that you have. We increased it by $200 per child. Many folks, again, I don't want to overstate the case, but many folks who have borrowed money to buy a car and are paying interest will get to deduct a portion of that interest that they pay on their automobile purchase as a result of the changes we made in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And I could go on about other changes we made for small businesses. One in particular, if you're a sub-S corporation, a subchapter S corporation, or you're a limited partnership, or what we call an LLC in Louisiana, that stands for Louisiana Limited Liability Corporation, which means that you're taxed directly on the income that your small business earns. We made permanent the 20% reductions for distributions of business income for LLCs and LLPs and sub-S corporations. So if you add all of these tax changes up, and again, I didn't talk about all of the tax changes in the one big beautiful bill, but if you added the ones up that I talked about, that means an extra $100 billion in people's pockets throughout America. Democrats, Republicans, independents. And most people have more money held out of their check than they owe the IRS. And that's not unusual, particularly when we make tax changes. I mention that because this means that $100 billion, people are going to get checks from the federal government. They're going to get money back. God bless them. They deserve it. Now, I've got a couple of tips about how you can get that money back quickly. If you're able to do three things. If you file early, file your tax return. If you want your money back as quickly as possible, file your tax return early. Number two, file electronically. I know for some that's a pain. I don't much like it. I like to file a paper return, but some people like to file electronically. Some people don't. But if you do file electronically, you're going to get your money back from the federal government more quickly. The third thing you need to do is to tell the federal government that you don't want a paper check. You'd like your money deposited directly into your bank account. If you do those three things, file early, file electronically, and tell the IRS that you want the money sent directly, electronically, into your bank account, then you're likely to get your tax refund within 2 to 3 weeks. Your portion of that $100 billion, thanks to the one big beautiful bill that Republicans in the House and the Senate passed. That's going to help a lot in terms of dealing with the cost of living in America. And I'm very proud of our effort. Now let me say a word about Minneapolis. There's a lot we know. There's a lot we don't know. I want to talk about 3 things we do know. Number one, the loss of life in Minneapolis was a tragedy. And if you can't admit that, you have a padlock on your heart. It was a tragedy. We don't have all the facts. I know everyone's seen the videos, but the people involved haven't been interviewed. There are a lot of facts we have, but a lot of facts we don't have. And I am not going to rush to judge. I'm not going to rush to judge. President Trump has promised a full and thorough and transparent investigation. And I thank him for that. But regardless of what we find out, we all have to concede, we all should concede that the loss of life in Minneapolis was a tragedy. And I'm sorry it happened. Number two, this is the second thing that I know. You don't have to be Einstein's cousin. You don't have to be a senior at Caltech to know that illegal immigration is illegal. Duh. It's illegal. And those of us who believe that no one is above the law, we all say we believe that. I believe it. No one, those of us who say that no one is above the law have to concede that people in our country illegally are not above the law either. The law applies to them as well. Our immigration statutes are not second-tier laws. They matter just as much as the other statutes that have been passed by the elected members of Congress. And just like the other laws, the immigration laws have consequences and should have consequences if you violate them. Now, so I guess what I'm saying, Mr. President, is I support enforcement of our immigration laws. Now, how you enforce those laws matters. Those laws, like all laws, have to be enforced in accordance with due process. Those immigration statutes, like all laws, have to be enforced in accordance with equal protection. Those laws have to be enforced in accordance with a well-known Supreme Court case, 1968, called Terry v. Ohio, which sets forth the standards. Reasonable suspicion is the standard chosen by the Supreme Court, by which someone can be stopped and questioned when a law enforcement official doesn't have probable cause. Terry v. Ohio has to be followed. So number one, illegal immigration is illegal. We should enforce our immigration laws, but how we enforce them matters. Third and final point. You have the right to protest in America. Let me say that again. You have the right to protest in America. You do not have the right to protest violently. And in fact, violence, as you protest, undermines the morality of the thing that you're protesting over. Let me say that again. Violence, if you choose violence when you protest, that undermines the morality of the movement that you say your movement is based upon. You know who else understood that? Dr. King. King understood it. Gandhi understood it. Mandela understood it. Violently protesting, not protesting, but violently protesting undermines the morality that you say your cause is built upon. It's also dangerous. It's dangerous it's dangerous and it's stupid. It's 12-piece bucket of stupid. Because when you protest violently, when you interfere with a cop or an ICE officer, it's not going to end well. It's not. Under the best of circumstances, these officers are trying to enforce federal law. And the people with respect to whom they're trying to enforce federal law are, in most cases, I'm not going to say all cases, but in most cases are criminals. Not criminals because they're here illegally, though that too is a violation of our law, but criminals because they have violated other laws, in many cases felonies. And those ICE officials, those cops are scared. They're scared. They're dealing with someone who could be armed, someone who could be dangerous. So you've got a powder keg. And when protesters choose to protest violently and harass those ICE officials and blow whistles in their ears and block their way and spit in their faces and curse them and curse their children, they're giving off sparks. in a powder keg. And it's not going to end well in many cases. And the truth of the matter is, it's been my experience in life, most, I'm not going to say all, most cops will leave you alone unless you do illegal stuff. So, as we go forward in America and try to enforce our laws in conformity with the United States Constitution, as we go forward together in America, and while we're respecting people's constitutional rights, we respect our law enforcement officials who are doing a very difficult job. As we go forward in America today, as the President has promised, to have a full and fair and transparent investigation of the tragic loss of life in Minneapolis,